Okay, so good morning and welcome to the last lecture. So this will be a revision lecture for our ICT configuration administration module. There are no stuff on the projector because I don't want you to see what's on the screen. It's the exam test. So what I will do today is I will do a little bit of revision and I will point out specific information that you need to know in order to do better in the exam. So this will help you focus your revision a little bit better for this module. The exam is, as you just said, the first Friday of the week that we're back, so Friday the 9th of January. Yeah. Make sure you go to the exam at least 20 minutes before the exam starts. All right, because you will need to sit down, log into the computer, find the exam, and start it on the safe exam browser and all that. So give yourself plenty of time to do this so that when you are there and you're about to start the test, you have been sitting at your computer and getting bored / relaxing for at least a couple of minutes before the actual exam itself starts. Okay. Now, there will be a difference this year in the exam process. There will be no little name tags on the desks to tell you where to sit. So when you go into the lab with the computers, you don't have to find where you're supposed to be sitting. You can sit wherever you like, preferably next to your friends so that they can help you with the exam. So because of this, we will be particularly vigilant from now on about people talking to each other. Okay, so keep that in mind, please. You want to take the risk, big risk. So the exam itself, the exam will consist of 50 questions. You will have 1 hour to do them. The questions are pretty fast. There are multiple choice, multiple response. These ones should go by very quickly. And the other type of questions that you might have is fill in the blanks. So usually these are the questions that I ask you, which command does X, Y, or Z. Okay. There will be some matching exams. So I will give you 3 options and they will have 3 options and then you need to match the correct one to the correct one. And that's pretty much it. The questions themselves, the most efficient way to do the exam is this. So once you start the exam, you'll have the question in the middle. On the left, if I remember correctly, it tells you the time and everything. And on the right, there is a panel with the 50 questions. There's a panel with 50 numbers on it, 50 boxes. That's the navigation menu. So you can use that in order to navigate around the exam, which means that you can go back and forth in questions. You can go back to questions if you haven't answered them and so on. So what I would like you to do when the exam starts, I want you to look at the first question. If you immediately know the answer, answer it, move on to question 2. If you don't immediately know the answer and you're not 100% confident about it, leave it unanswered, move on to question 3. If you don't know question 3, move on to question 4. Move on until the end of the questions. So have a first look at all 50 of them. And by the end of this, it will be within 5 or 7 minutes that you have done this process. You will know exactly how many questions you've known already straight away and how many questions are actually left for you to battle with during the test, the ones that you have to actually think about. Okay. This can go either one of 2 ways, admittedly. If you do find yourself at the 50th question and you've answered like more than half of them, you'll be very happy. If you've answered 3 of them, you'll be depressed. However, this also means that now you know what all of the questions look like and you know whether you have enough time in front of you to answer everything, and you can go back to the questions and deal with them in a more organized way. So go back to each of the questions, use the navigation panel, and try to answer them as best as you can. Never ever spend more than 5 minutes in a question unless you're finished with all of the other questions in the exam and you only have like 2 or 3 left and you're really struggling to answer them. Okay, the idea is that you answer questions as quickly and confidently as you can, and if you cannot, then go back to them. So after you do that initial pass of questions you know the answers to immediately, when you do the second pass of the questions, you can apply the same principle, but don't dwell on each of the questions for too long. Okay, so once you have done this, then the answers that you provide to the questions are not final unless you've submitted it. So if you choose a specific answer to a question and you're not sure about it and you're reviewing the questions in the end before you actually submit, you can of course always change your answer. All right, your questions are only final once you hit that submit button, and that's it. If you run out of time, don't panic. The test will auto-submit. Okay, so it will submit on its own, and you don't need to do anything about it. It's not like you run out of time, so none of the questions will be submitted and you get 0%. All right, every question that you've answered will get accounted for. Now, the questions in the exam itself, I have split them into various categories. There is a Linux category for the ones that have to do with Linux administration. There's a networking category for the ones that have to do with networking. There is routing, DNS, and kickstart questions. Okay, so I have a few of the Linux questions that have to do with the commands. So that second half of the first lab sheet, I will tell you now, if you don't have that second half in the logbook of the commands, typing them and trying them on the terminal and explaining what they do, that's straight away 10 marks off. Yeah. So the first lab sheet is worth 20 marks, 10 marks for the installation, 10 marks for the questions themselves. So make sure you have them in the logbook. If you don't, at least try to explain them what they do, at the very least, so that you know what they do. Because if you get a question that asks and says, what does the ls-a command do? You should be able to answer it, lists all of the contents of the directory, including the hidden files as well. Okay, so there will be questions like that. Other questions in the general way that the operating system works. So for example, and also specifically how virtual machines work in Linux as well, yes? So if I'm asking something technical, for example, when you format a hard drive inside a VMware virtual machine, what are you actually formatting? Nothing. Okay, you're not formatting the physical hard drive of the computer that the host is sitting on. The virtual machine that you're running consists of a bunch of files that physically exist and take up space on your hard drive. When you're formatting something inside there, all you're doing is you're changing the emulation of that hard drive inside the virtual machine. Okay, so you're only formatting the virtual simulated hard drive of that virtual machine. For the operating system inside that virtual machine, yes, you've just formatted its hard drive, but in reality, you haven't really. Okay, it's all software and it's all a simulation. You're in the Matrix. You know the Matrix movie, or am I too old? All right. So anyway, yes. So you need to make sure that you know the commands. Okay, basic commands like man, cd, ls, and all that, you should definitely know them. I might ask you if a command is correct. So I might give you a ps-ef pipe grep vmnet and ask you what it does. I might ask you if it's correct or not. Or I might say, what does this command do? And one of the options might be nothing, it's wrong syntax. If I do have that in there, you need to make sure that you have the correct syntax for it. If there is a space wrong, if there is a dash wrong, if there is a capital letter instead of a small letter, I have triple checked these questions, especially this year because I won't be here. There are no typos in the exam. All right, if it's wrong, it's wrong. That's it. If you're on a terminal and you don't type a command exactly as it should be typed, it will not work. In the same principle, the answer will be wrong. Okay. So other than commands, I do want you to know about VMware, all the basic principles of operation. So how does it actually work? What different modes of networking it supports, bridge, NAT, host only and everything, which network cards actually correspond to those default configurations of VMware, what different types of virtual machines that we can have in VMware, and what different types of settings we can change in a virtual machine when it's switched off or when it's switched on. So for example, can I add more CPU cores to a virtual machine when the virtual machine is running? Yes, I can, but it will restart. So there's various little details like this. Okay, I try not to go into too much detail, and I try to answer questions of things that you've seen in the lab before and not just random theoretical questions about it. Okay, because if I could do that, then that would really be unfair to you. All right, so I won't. So everything in the exam will be something that you've seen in your logbook or that you've seen in Moodle. All right. So moving on to from commands and everything. Okay, let's go. Make sure you know things like commands like chmod, for example. So you have, if you need to change permissions on a file, like know what it does and what the specific structure of it is. I don't expect you to know all of the little numbers next to it, 777 or 700, exactly what they mean. It's fine. I just want you to know generally what the command does and what the syntax for it actually is. Partitioning in Linux. Okay, so I want you to know what the basic partitioning structure should be for a default Linux installation. If you remember on Prometheus, when we build it, there are how many partitions in the beginning of it when it shows up? Yeah, so there's 4 minimum. We get rid of one of them. We get rid of /home. Who knows why?
Because we need more space in the root.
Yes. Okay. The /home directory is for all of the users of the system to have their home directories. So that's where by default the operating system gives the most hard drive space, and it makes it a separate partition on the hard drive so that if something goes wrong on that partition, it doesn't actually affect the operating system kernel that much. Okay. However, we only deleted the home partition because we will only be using the computer as user root. So we just need all of the space to go to the / directory. Okay. So don't get confused between what's the default installation and what we did in the lab. All right. Now, network cards in Linux, what are they usually called in different cases? Okay, so it's going to be ENS33, it's probably inside the virtual machine. If it's something, it's probably something very old, and so on. Okay. Commands. What is the root user's home directory? It's not /home, it's /root. And also, if a command says where is the location of the virtual machines inside, a Linux machine, it will either be in /home/VMware if you're a normal user, or it will be in /root/VMware if you're logged in as a root user, as we did in the labs, which is still the root user's home directory. So /root equals /home for user root. Yeah. System configurations. So basically, there is a question, I think, in the first lab sheet, like what do all of the / subdirectories do? So what's in /etc, what is in /bin, /opt, and so on. So it's a question in the first lab sheet. Most people tend not to answer it and lose those 2 marks. It's fine. For a little bit of Googling, I want you to know what they do. There is a question that asks, what does the specific directory actually do? Okay. So make sure you look into this if you don't have it in your logbook already. Then we'll move on to networking. So the networking questions, the hardest question that you can get in this exam really are the conversion questions. I might give you an IP address and I might tell you convert this address from decimal to binary. Or I might give you a subnet mask in binary and tell you convert it into decimal. Usually, because I'm not that mean, they will be addresses or subnet masks that you've used before. So really, if you can figure out how to do the conversion, just type what you know, you might get it. Yeah. So it might be 252, it might be 254, it might be something else. Okay. So these are the questions that will take the most time. You can have a calculator in the lab, but I don't know if you can do the conversion from binary to decimal in the calculators that you have. I really have never done it. You will also have a piece of paper that you can use. So you will be given a blank piece of paper in the exam. So make sure you bring a pen with you. Okay. And you can actually write down the IP address and then convert it from binary to decimal and vice versa and so on. Okay. So that's that. All of the commands to start network cards and everything. Again, the first lab sheet, annoyingly, is the easiest to go through, but because it has the most legwork, it has the most background knowledge into the operating system and everything. So it has quite a lot of questions that come from it. So for example, the networking commands, how to start up a network card in a terminal in Linux. Okay, so the ifconfig, an IP address, and subnet mask up command. Or how to add a default gateway, root add -net, and so on and so forth. Okay, so make sure you know these commands and how they work and what their structure is. Other networking questions that you might get is, I might give you a subnet mask and I might ask you how many hosts can we have in there. When I say how many hosts can we have in there, it means how many usable IP addresses Yes, how many numbers in there? All right, you need to remember that you need to take into consideration the network and the broadcast address and remove them. So it's not going to be 8, it's going to be 6. It's not going to be 4, it's going to be 2. All right. And then we move on to some routing questions. The basics, so how do we actually do routing in Linux, at least in CentOS 7 and older? Okay, so I want you to know what Zebra, Quagga, OSPF, everything is. Okay, don't get confused. Zebra is the routing daemon, OSPF is the routing protocol, how they're configured, so which files control them, and I even want you to know exactly the structure of those files. So because I might give an example of a file and it might be correct or it might be wrong, and I might ask you, does this do what it's supposed to be doing? So you need to know it. Things that are required to be running on a Linux box in order for it to be a router. So other than the routing protocol itself, you need to make sure that the firewall is correctly configured, either disabled or allowed to pass the routing protocol through, and packet forwarding also needs to be enabled, otherwise nothing will happen between the interfaces. Okay. Some very basic routing questions, like for example, can computers that are on the same physical network but on different subnets communicate with each other? So you should know this. If they're on a different subnet, then they cannot, and we need routing. Okay. It would be a good idea to go to the virtual network labs, that I think the link is, onto the firewall.cx and have a look at CIDR there. Okay, because it explains all of the principles with fancy colors and everything and diagrams, and it's nice. Read it just once in your life, so that later when you go into the industry and work and you definitely need it, because it's something like the alphabet in networking, then at least you know what you're looking for. Okay. And then we move on to DNS. I want you to know the command to run a DNS server in debug mode. It's not in the lab sheet. It's name D-F-G-D1. It's on video, so yeah, I've said it. Okay, so I've used it a lot in order to troubleshoot your DNS servers. All right, hopefully you should be writing things like that down when I come and help you on your computers. But if not, yes, so this is a very useful tool for you to know. So I do want you to know that command. All right. I want you to know problems that come up when we're trying to run the DNS server. The most common one was permissions. Okay, so the service wouldn't run because of permissions, and you had to dismount the var named folder, for example. What is a search path and where is it actually defined at? Okay, so when you're saying I want to ping Prometheus, how does the computer know that you mean I want to ping prometheus.heal.netlab.uk? So that heal.netlab.uk should exist in etc.resolve.conf. So that is the search path. So that is essentially the surname of your computer, and your computer should know it because it should be in resolve.conf. All right. Named.conf file, where it lives in /etc, and what it actually does, it runs the service and it configures the most basic functionality of the service. So it tells us which IP address the server is running on. It tells us who is allowed to ask this server for information, and it defines all of the forward and reverse zones of our domain, the domain that we're responsible for. There is also an initial, so FQDN. Who knows what FQDN means? I'm so happy. Yes, please know what it means. All right. All right. Which folder holds the DNS configuration zone? So everything lives in var named D. Everything apart from the named.conf file, which lives in etc. Because etc. is the folder that holds all of the configuration files that run services in the operating system, one way or another. Okay. And a little bit of kickstart. So details of how the actual thing works. So for example, how does the client authenticate itself to the DHCP server? So your DHCP server is running, you start up a virtual machine. How does the DHCP server know to give that virtual machine an IP address or not? It's through the virtual machine's MAC address, okay? Through the network card that's sending the request. I want you to know the process for Kickstart, so the correct chronological order of tasks that need to be performed for it to work. Okay. Yes, there have been debates about this with me in the past. Yes, the first thing that you can do, you can actually copy everything into Mount Deploy, but that's not what we did in the lab. Okay, so the first thing we do in the lab is we build the blank virtual machine. Then the second thing is we set up the DHCP server. Then we set up the NFS server. Then we do the Kickstart configuration file. Then we copy all the files in the correct locations. And then we power up the virtual machine and type the command and pray. Okay, so yes, there are ways that you can do this. If I ask this question, I think it's there. I'm pretty sure it's there. I want to know the order that we did it in the lab. Okay, so that's the deal, that's the agreement. Details like, do you need to use static IP addresses when you boot your Kickstarted VM, or can you get away with dynamically allocated IP addresses? It all depends on how well you set up your DHCP server, the firewall, and the network infrastructure and everything else. Okay, you can do whatever you want as long as you configure it correctly. Okay, that's the answer to that. How the DHCP server works. So where does the configuration file for it actually live? So it's in /etc/dhcp/dhcpd.conf. So that little sneaky D in the end there, it's a bit weird. Okay. I want you to know what the DHCP file looks like and what we actually change in it, the subnet declarations. So either the blank subnet declarations that are just there to serve the DHCP server to recognize the network cards, or the full subnet declarations that contain the virtual machines that we're building that need to know about the default gateway, the subnet mask and everything else, the MAC address of the virtual machine that we're building as a client, and all of that information in there. Okay. NFS, so this is completely difficult service to configure with one file called exports that has 2 lines in it. Okay, but you need to be able to explain what's in those 2 lines. So if you have an IP address, you will be sharing that folder only to that specific machine that has that IP address, which is not a very good idea unless you're trying to tighten up your security in your system so much. You have to be so explicit about what you share and where. Generally, when we share stuff on a network, we share them onto a network. So we need a network address and then a subnet mask next to it so that we know how big the network is and so on. Okay. Of course, I wanted to know the commands to run this. So service DHCPD start and NFS start and all that. And what else? Let's see. That's okay. The troubleshooting command that we used, tail -f var log messages. Okay, I want you to remember it, and I want you to know what it does. So it monitors the messaging system on the system, the logging system of your operating system, essentially. So it can tell you if the DHCP server has given an IP address to your client that's connecting to it, or if it's any interaction really between them. It can tell you if a share has been read through exports and everything else, if a service has been restarted or not successfully, and so on. And that's pretty much it. Now, the other good news to all of this is that the exam is open book. So if you've been panicking about the commands all this time, I've been keeping this piece of information until the end, so that you'll be happy. So you are allowed to bring into the exam a double-sided A4 piece of paper. So you can have a piece of A4 and you can have anything you like onto it, back and front. Written by hand or typed. You can make tiny, tiny letters, bring a magnifying glass with you, and have your entire logbook there if you want to. Okay, and I'll take a picture of it if you manage this and frame it, I'll be very proud of you. Okay, so you can do whatever you like with that. You're not allowed to bring anything else other than that piece of A4 into the exam. Okay, and you should ideally, write all of the commands in there and write all of the directories at the bare minimum of where everything is actually located in the operating system and in the services that we're configuring. All right. You should theoretically know them, and later on when you do go out in the industry, you will know them, but nobody would expect you to remember everything from by heart straight away. When I come back in September, I barely remember half of the commands that I use, but now if you ask me absolutely anything, I will remember it. So it's a matter of practice. Okay, so bring that with you. You will be stressed anyway and everything, so it's fine. So it's better to have some help with you rather than just throw you in the deep without any help. Okay, all right. So that's it, basically. Do you have any questions about the exam at all? Yes.
You said the exam is on a Friday.
Yes.
It looked like it's on a Tuesday.
Check your timetables, guys. I don't know. I can't see your timetables, and I haven't checked my, the exam timetable. It's
January 9th, so actually Tuesday.
okay. So Friday the 12th or whatever it is. Anyway, the exam is when the exam shows up on your timetable. It's very easy. Okay, you go where they tell you to go. Right, there will be multiple exam centers because there's plenty of you. There's 111 of you, 112. All right, so they will split you across different rooms. So don't go where your friend goes. Yes? Check your timetable, go to where you're supposed to go. All right, so because we've had this in the past, so when you get to the exam, in the exam itself, generally try to be as quiet as possible. Okay, don't talk with each other at all, and don't do this. It's our favorite thing. All right, we do have the right to actually, kick you out of the exam. So, right. Logbooks. Tomorrow morning and Friday morning and afternoon. Be in the lab, especially if you're in the first quadrant, so from 1 until 12, you need to be in the lab at least 10-15 minutes before we start, okay? Because that is the first group that I check, okay? I will do that first quadrant, and then I will do the other one that's by the window on the left side. So the left side of the lab will be seen first, and then I will go on to the third one, which is near the door, and then I will do the one by the windows. So if you're up with the one by the windows, just come after an hour or something. It's up to you. Okay, just be there when I'm at your desk. It might run a bit late. The labs are quite full, so 2 out of 3 sessions are completely full. There's 48 of you and there's only 1 of me. To make this as quick and efficient as possible, I need 2 things. I need you to have your work ready on your computer, have your logbook open. If it is in a Google Doc, I want it under 150% magnification because I'm getting old, I'm 44 now. Okay, so if you have everything ready on the screen, it will be easier and faster for me. I will tell you what mark you will get. There will be no debate about that mark. As soon as I hear, you're giving me 75, can't I have 90? I will make it a 65. Yes? Any complaints or discussion about the marks, send me an email and ask for a remarking. All right, it shouldn't happen. Generally, I've been accused of being too open-handed with my marking and everything, too generous. All right, so that shouldn't happen. If I give you a bad mark, it means you probably deserved a much worse mark. Yes? I want you all to pass, and I want you all to get the first class if possible. So if there are criteria that I use when I mark something, okay? And remember, in order to get full marks for something, the work in the logbook needs to be excellent. So if I tell you that, for example, you can get full marks, so you can get a 70%, which is the A here, yes? Even if you haven't done Kickstart, it means that everything up to and including DNS needs to be absolutely perfect. At the very least, all of the tasks must have been completed and documented, and ideally explained why as well. Okay, so if you do everything and DNS and you're missing half of the commands in the first lab sheet, you will get a 65. Okay, so this is generally how it goes. Any questions about that? All right, okay. So now that we've explained everything, that's it for today. Any questions in general? No? I won't be here in January during the exam, but I will be on my phone and on my computer and everything. So if there is something terribly wrong with the exam, you can ask your invigilator. So if a question is, you don't understand its meaning and everything else, the invigilator will come and have a look. If they think that they understand it and you should be able to understand it, they will do nothing about it and they will tell you you're on your own, which is a valid answer in an exam scenario, yes. But if a couple of people complain about a specific exam, then the invigilator might contact me and ask me and say, look, Vas, there is this thing in that question, what is it? As I said, because I won't be here, I have triple checked absolutely all of the questions. There are no typos. Like I can bet like £100 on it, maybe 50. Okay. So if something is you don't understand and everything, don't be surprised if you get the reply back from the invigilator that no, this is perfectly reasonable. Try to figure it out. Okay. On the other hand, if something is horribly wrong with the question, they will contact me. You just move on to other questions and they will come back and tell you that yes, this is wrong, it should have been this. And in fact, they will make an announcement for it in the class. Also, last detail, I have more than 50 questions in the database. So you all might not get all the same questions. Okay, some people might get questions that somebody else didn't get. All right, so don't worry about that. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll see you all in the lab.